name is Jason Chatro, and I'm here today with Joshua Graham, who is the Amazon and Barnes & Noble #1 best-selling author, winner of the International Book Awards, and author of just released Dark Room and the best-selling book Beyond Justice. And really excited about talking with you today, Josh, and appreciate you stopping by.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Well, first, as we get started, just want to talk to you a little about, kind of what your journey into the field of writing looked like. You know, how did that get started, and at what point did you realize or think that, hey, I want to be a writer?
Well, I think I've always enjoyed telling stories, and I've always enjoyed writing, and I did a lot of it as a young child. I just never paid much attention to it because some of the things when I was a child, in terms of writing, were in the form of compositions or essays or even like spelling stories where you take like their 20 spelling words of the week and create a story out of it. And I was always the person who would be raising my hand saying, ooh, ooh, pick me. I want to, read my story. And they got to the point where like, oh, here he goes again. But I just loved doing that. So even as a young person, I really enjoyed doing that. And as I grew older, it was just a side thing that I would do, but I would become the person they would pick to help write a script for the school play, or when I was at church in the youth group, we had to put together a video. I'd be the person to write the scripts and produce it and film it and edit it and that kind of thing. So I've always enjoyed that. One of the creative outlets for me in my more recent years has been writing. And the way that came about was that prior to becoming a professional writer, I worked in the field of IT for about 13 years. I went from being a support help desk person to an IT director. But prior to those 13 years, I had 12 years of college in music and a career in music. So I went to Juilliard, I got a master's and bachelor's there. I got my doctorate at Johns Hopkins University. And towards the latter years, I had been a college professor teaching music, and I'd been performing internationally as a cello soloist and an orchestral member. So that was what I was doing. I was always doing something creative, but then came that season after I got married and had children where I did about 13 years of IT work. So during that time, obviously I wasn't performing professionally and doing as much musically. I still I felt a strong need for a creative outlet. So on my breaks or lunch hours, I would just start writing fictional stories. So what eventually happened was that some of my online friends were really enjoying what I was writing, and I was thinking, it's okay, it's just, for fun, I'm glad you like it. But they would say, no, 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 you need to enter this writing contest. And so I looked into it and said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I sent some of my stories in the first year, and they were all rejected, but they came back with a very nice rejection letter from the editor, and the editor was basically encouraging me, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't feel that these would fit into our anthology this year, but I encourage you to keep learning and keep writing, and next year definitely try again. So rather than get discouraged, I was like, hey, that's a nice rejection letter. It was better than you stink. So I decided to write again, and I was watching the editors. He had a bulletin board that he ran on AOL back then, and he was just engaging all the different possible young writers who are unpublished writers and giving them hints on writing. And I was just soaking it up because, hey, this is the editor of the anthology contest that I want to enter. If he's giving us hints, I better pay attention. So I was taking notes, and one day one of his posts said something to the effect that if somebody turns in 10 stories to me this year, automatically, no matter how good or bad those stories are, I'm going to pay extra attention to this person because they're showing me that they've got the commitment of a professional writer. So I thought, okay, I can do short stories. I can try to do 10 because I submitted about 5 of them the year before. And they're short stories that have to be less than 5,000 words. And so I thought to myself, let me wow him and send him 20 stories. I've got a whole year to do it. So I just gave myself a deadline. Okay, with 12 months, all I need to do is write 2 stories a month and 2 short stories. And I started to learn that by doing that, giving myself a deadline, and I started to realize that I was actually able to write better and faster the more I did it. By the time I had written maybe my 10th story, I really hit my stride. And all I needed was a writing prompt and an idea like, take this idea and run with it. And then I would just write, and because of my deadlines, I just didn't think too much about it. I just wrote it. But I noticed as I looked back to it that they were getting better and better. And not for my own, I'm not bragging, but the feedback I was getting, let's just put it that way. The feedback was they were just saying it's really getting even better. So that year, I had my 20 stories, and we still had a week before the contest was closed. So I was a part of a writing group that were every one of the authors, our aspiring authors, were trying to enter the same contest. So one of them challenged us and said, "Hey, you still have a week left. You've probably already sent in your entries. Write another story because you still have time. Why don't we do that?" We were challenging each other. So of course, being the way I am, I said, "I'm going to write three more stories." So I submitted a total of 23 stories that year, and I actually got into the anthology. And not only did I get into the anthology, but all the rejection letters I got back, maybe about 10 of them, they were only rejected because he already chose a story of mine. And he said, "Send this back next year because it's definitely a winner, and it's definitely worthy of being a winner. So you will at least have, something good enough to be in the anthology next year." So the next year, I didn't do quite as many, but I did quite a few entries. But what eventually happened was that I got into the anthology 3 years in a row and disqualified myself because when you've got made three professional sales, and the anthology was published by Simon and Schuster Pocket Books, then you're considered a professional writer, and you can no longer enter that contest as a professional. So I know it's a long story. I warned you before that. Eventually was that somewhere in the middle of those 3 years, this editor invited me to come up to Oregon where he holds professional writer workshops. And one of them was a workshop that it's called When to Quit Your Day Job. And
Hmm.
that basically was a simulation of the professional writer's career for 8 years, juggling a day job and being able to come off the day job and become a full-time writer. So and he told me that that well basically you're going to simulate 8 years of a writer's life in 2 days in a weekend. And so he said to me to warn me beforehand that you will either decide that this is what you want to do for the rest of your life or you'll run away screaming. So I'm glad I didn't run away screaming. I was actually more convinced than ever that I would love to do this. So it took me a few years, but from that point on, it was probably about in the year 2004 or 2005, I had made the decision that this is what I wanted to do. But it would be another 3 years before I actually got published and got to where I am today.
That's great. Now, I mean, you talk a little bit about what it took to get there. Obviously, you had to have a pretty supportive wife to encourage you to do all this and let you spend your free time writing.
Oh, she was super supportive. I think she was just happy to see me not pining for my music days and looking back wistfully and feeling sad about it because I think she felt a little sad for me about that too. But she also knew that during my years of being a musician, it was a real struggle because it's performance and your career rides on every concert you give. If you play a wrong note or you play a poor concert, then it's going to affect your livelihood to some extent, or at least as a musician, I perceived it that way. So I always felt pressure. I always felt that it wasn't good enough. And she told me that I don't quite agree with her, but she told me that Joshua, you were miserable doing that. I mean, you loved what you were doing, but you're always under pressure, never feeling that you're good enough to do what you really wanted to do. And so it wasn't such a positive experience. So when she saw me taking out my creative energies into something else that was actually starting to yield results, and that's something I had more control over, because when you go on a stage and perform, that's it. From first note to the last note, that's it. It's all judged on what you do on that stage. With writing, as you know, you can edit, you can make a second draft or third draft, or you can scrap the whole thing and write something else. So it was a lot more under my control, and it was yielding, better results in some ways.
Mhm.
So, but the long and short of it is that I actually discovered that this is really what I was made to do, and I feel that much more fulfilled doing this than I've done than anything else I've ever done.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of writers struggle with, when they get criticism and feedback. I mean, you sound like somebody who, in order to press through that and really take it on, as a full time profession like you have, that you don't let it bother you as much as, some people. And the fact that you're mentioning about when you're performing on stage, that's kind of it. But you still get feedback, and sometimes you still get
Sure.
negative feedback. What's your advice maybe to people who struggle with that, or when they get a bad review or get lots of bad reviews, or get hatchet jobs done on them? What do you how do you kind of take on? I mean, because I'm sure that even as successful as you've been, you still get some of that
Sure.
feedback from readers. What's your advice on how to handle that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I do get negative feedback, and everybody does. Even John Grisham and Stephen King. You know, all you if you're an aspiring writer, or any level of writer, and you feel bad about that one-star review that popped up on Amazon, just go over to any of the #1 bestseller New York Times bestsellers on Amazon and click on that little spot that says one-star review, and I bet you they'll have a lot more one-star reviews than you do because they just have a lot more reviews in general. But they get their one-star scathing reviews too. And the one thing I can say is don't take it personally because everybody's entitled to their opinion, even though their opinion may be wrong. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and Amazon makes it that they can express any opinion they want as long as it's not abusive or irrelevant. Um, and the other thing I would say is that rejection is just not rejection, but criticism is just part of it. One piece of advice I learned was that. First, grow a thick skin if you want to be a writer. It's just you have to have that. And second, the only opinion that really matters is the one from
Oh, I'm losing you.
who can write you a paycheck is willing to put money on the line for your book. Then it's a book worthy of publication. So the only criticism that really, I mean, we all will feel bad if somebody doesn't like our book, but the fact is you can't please everybody. But on the other side of it is of this topic is that if you start to see the same themes being repeated over and over in the negative reviews, well, you can choose to just say, hey, well, forget about them. Who cares about what they say? Well, that's okay to protect yourself from being destroyed by it. But, a wise person will take it to heart and say, maybe there's something to be said here. That doesn't necessarily mean that you write your book based on consensus, but it's certainly worth investigating. I'm not saying now go revise and scrap the whole book and rewrite the whole thing just because 10 people said that they didn't like the first chapter. On the other hand, if 10 people didn't like the first chapter for a certain reason, and you actually look into it with an open mind and think, oh yeah, you know what? I think they might be right, not out of fear for pleasing them, but out of just objectivity, then you might want to investigate that.
That's great. Well, that's good advice. Well, now I know your books explore elements of faith. A lot of the stories that you write. How does incorporating elements of faith impact your story writing?
Well, it's when I can sum it up with the old adage, write what you know. And the reason I have I write with a faith element in it is mainly because this is such a part of my own life. Now, you might think that that would mean that I'm one of those person who goes around preaching and proselytizing because I'm pretty open about what I believe, but I'm not like that at all. And even in my books, people who never pick up a book of a Christian fiction or anything like that they've remarked that this book had some faith element in it, but it wasn't hitting me over the head, and I didn't mind it at all. Even Stephen King puts elements of faith in his book, and Dean Koontz. They're not heavily laden with it, and I don't think I write like books that what you'd find, say, necessarily only in a Christian bookstore or in the religious fiction shelves. They can go there, but they wouldn't only be exclusively there. Putting the faith element into it is just because it's my worldview. It's the way I see things, and I actually think it's a very interesting part of my life that I enjoy sharing with people. So I want to do it in a way that doesn't necessarily offend people, that doesn't make them feel that. And I put the faith element in my books in a way such that they give people a choice. They don't. The messages are never like, this is what you have to believe, or you're going to face damnation and hellfire and brimstone. I'm never like that. I'm not even like that in real life. But it's basically like, hey, check this out. What do you think of this? And I usually leave it so that the reader can decide for themselves. But I just want them to take a look at this aspect of life, of faith, in a way that is free of prejudices and preconceived notions, so that they can decide for themselves, hey, this is actually interesting. Maybe I want to look into it more. Or they can say, well, after I give it a good look, maybe it's not for me. But I just want them to give it a fair chance, and I put it in as non-threatening a way as I possibly can.
That's great. Now your new book, Darkroom. We'll talk about that for a minute. It's got a really interesting premise. Tell us the idea behind the book, and and what do you think about the storyline that's just so arresting for readers?
Darkroom. The main theme about this book I tend to like to have a theme, an overriding theme in each one of my books. And Robert McKee, the director and film pedagogue, he calls it in his book. There's a book he wrote called Story, and it's about film writing, but it's really about story, regardless of the medium. He calls this concept the controlling idea, and this controlling idea permeates the entire story from beginning to end in every aspect, in the visual aspects, in the dialogue, and in whatever. That it basically controls the whole direction of the story. So with Darkroom, the controlling idea is the truth shall set you free. And I think what is compelling about this book is that it takes several characters, two main characters who are involved in something that is a pretty big cover-up, but it shows how two different people handled the truth. And it shows that both of them paid a price for it. They could not help but pay a price because it's a very, controversial topic that they're trying to deal with, and that is like war atrocities during the Vietnam War. And one of them handles it in a way that is less than honorable. The other one ultimately handles it in a way that is honorable, but both of them pay a big price for it. And I wanted to try to illustrate how the prison that we will face when we try to withhold the truth or when we try to cover it with lies rather than face it and deal with it with integrity. And at the very end of the book, it illustrates that very clearly where these two characters come to the end of this particular plot thread, and you see how they handle it and you see the results of it. But everything in the book is leading up to that. And my main protagonist, Sandra Carrick, she's the one who kind of stumbles into it, and now in her quest to try to understand, she starts to unravel the truth, and now this truth that had to be covered up for about 40 years is in danger of coming out into the public eye. So now she becomes the prey and the person who knows too much, and it has to be stopped at all costs.
That's great. Yeah, and the trailer for it just is a fantastic trailer. I don't know if you had anything to do with that or not from your publisher, but made the hair on my arm stand up. It was really it's really good.
Yeah, it was fun to do that trailer. That was done by Book Candy Studios, and they're great to work with. As you've seen, they did great visuals and great soundtrack, and I had some involvement in giving them some creative direction, but once they had that, they ran with it, and I have to say they far exceeded my expectations. I love that trailer.
Oh yeah, it was really good. Well, tell us a little bit. I know anybody follows you on Facebook. I guess gives me some insight into that knowing that you're a celloist now. I know how you why you're always requesting people's recommendations for classical composers while you're writing. Tell us how people can connect with you online through Facebook and things like that.
Yeah, well, basically, on Facebook, I have both a fan page and a personal profile. Both of them I do check. And let me see if I can remember it off the top of my head. For my personal page, it's www.facebook.com/Joshua Graham. However, and it's just one string of character, no space. The only thing you have to notice is that with Joshua Graham, you replace the O in Joshua with a 0.
Okay.
And that will take him to Facebook. And I'm also on Twitter with the same handle, Joshua Graham, with a 0 instead of an O. And I'm not trying to be cryptic. It's just that the name Joshua Graham is much more common than you would think. So it's been taken a long time ago.
And website, Twitter, things on there?
Yeah, and website is www.joshua-graham.com. And when you go there, it'll show you information about my books. And if you want to keep up to date with my latest blogs, just click on the blog link, and it'll take you to everything I've been writing recently on that blog.
Okay, great. Well, we really appreciate taking the time to talk to us. It's really interesting, and hearing about your story and how you got involved in writing. And maybe there's some aspiring IT guys out there somewhere who are tired of helping people turn their computers on and want to write for a living. It's some great inspiration for that. But really look forward to hopefully people pick up Darkroom, and I've heard a lot of good things about it and some of your other titles, and look forward to hearing more good things from you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Good.